So today I thought I'd do something a bit different. This will be the first instalment of a solo series called In the Pocket. Now, as you might have heard on the other episodes I've done with various guests, we cover a variety of topics. And again, it varies from people's own experiences, again, current events, people's reaction to them. And amongst that, I've had quite a few interesting questions. People reach out to me, and I thought I'd cover a few of these sort of topics. And again, anything like that, feel free to sort of chime into Fisticuffs Fisticuffs underscore podcast on Instagram and all social medias. But before we get stuck in, quick shout out to our sponsor, the English Hypontist. We'll go more into that later on, but again, quick shout out to him. Now, a huge question I've been asked quite a few times is, why did I start the podcast? How can I do my own podcast? Any advice? This kind of thing. And I'll play around with a few different topics, because the nature of this sort of thing in itself, it can come across as such a big sort of step for a lot of people to put themselves out there, be the sort of vulnerable. Okay, this is your idea, this is your vision, and then trying to put it into actual life sometimes doesn't always transition as nicely as you like to. Now, initially, the idea to start this podcast, so I love podcasts like Joe Rogan's, Dan Strauss's, and again, it's always the appreciation for the people who don't always have that voice, because again, most people who are the ones you want to look up to, want to sort of learn from, they aren't normally the ones who end up talking the most. So when you get the sort of, not the unsung heroes as such, but the people who sort of keep themselves to themselves, a bit of poking, a bit of prodding, normally you'll find it with the coaches. So you get people like, okay, not to sort of name names just for sake of people, but don't necessarily know my coaches. But again, you'll get the sort of striking coaches, grappling coaches, people who sort of have been around the game for absolute years. And also anecdotes, you think, okay, they're scratching the surface of things. I think if I can get proper conversation with them, because again, say like meeting a celebrity or someone you admire on the street, that initial interaction, then what? So you say, oh, let's get a picture, this, that, and the other, then what? You want to pick their brain a bit more, this sort of experiences. And this is where the idea sort of came to me in a sense. It wasn't a sort of, I want to put it out there, see what people think I should do it or not. Again, I thought, let's find out the practicality of doing it and then sort of figure out after the fact. Because you can get the whole balance of like paralysis by overanalysis, or you can go so Hail Mary the other end of things, sort of just trying to wing it. And I felt I had a happy medium with that to an extent. And again, it's not been without its sort of issues so far. But again, the idea in mind from my sort of podcast has been the sort of the nicer side of things, not so much trying to squeeze headlines out of people's experiences, try to have proper conversations, and again, get some interesting topics. So the first episode I did was with a friend, Mickey Mills. Now, he was such a supportive guy anyway, and again, when it comes to long form conversation, I wanted to have someone on, at least off the bat, who's, I don't know, quite good at carrying a conversation, someone quite proactive. And the conversation we had, again, after the sort of setup, sort of not issues as such, but again, trying to figure it all out. I call it the calibration sort of stage, trying to get the sound right, trying to get the video right. And again, it's always been a work in progress. And from the word go, made the whole thing so, I don't know, big shout out to him, made the whole process really refreshing, really relaxing. Because again, as much as it's meant to be him being podcasted, also interviewed as such, it was very much, he helped me relax into the sort of host role. And throughout the conversation, we covered quite a lot of topics. We're talking about like his experiences with like eating disorders and like various stuff like that. Again, it was very personal things. And again, it was really nice having someone that open. And after the fact, I had a lot of people reaching out about, oh, this is really, really amazing sort of thing. And having that sort of conversation with someone so happy, vibrant, confident, to then be so vulnerable in the same breath, it was really sort of refreshing. Again, that sort of, again, it can be quite abrupt, quite harsh almost, to sort of hear that sort of transition. But again, someone that confident to be open in that sort of sense. And it came from a place not trying to catch them out. So that first episode really started things really nicely. Again, when it came to progression as a whole, it's very tricky how you sort of deliver this. Because again, when you're comparing yourself to the Joe Rogans, people who are already established with crazy sort of followings, like the numbers I did in my first couple of episodes compared to what they do within minutes of uploading theirs, it's a different conversation. And this is where I want to go on this real topic of social media versus like reality kind of thing. And it's literally a meme. It's one of those things that where you expect, okay, if I start this from scratch, you're going to find a number of things. You're going to find all, oh look, this is already set up nice. You've got the fantastic studio. You've got all this, that, and the other. They've got sponsors, and life's all happy and all jolly. Now that sort of thing isn't always the way. So a few issues we've had so far, we've had like recording not working, certain errors, normally me. And again, massive shout out to my brother David. He's been non-stop help from the word go when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like, patience of a saint to put up with me and trying to work it out, and sort of like a monkey sort of bashing at a keyboard trying to work it out. But yeah, so we get a lot of frustration with this so far and the sort of build up, because as it comes to sort of trying to understand, trying to develop, trying to try new things, you need to be prepared to fail. So I'm sort of darting around different topics here, but again, being prepared to fail is a very counterintuitive thing to as such, because again, you wouldn't want to do something with the intention for it not to work, and that's not what I'm saying. It's more in the sense of, okay, I'm prepared to do this, and if it doesn't work out, it's trying to be composed and then deal with it. It's not a natural thing, and again, the frustrations, this, that, and the other. It's hard to try and keep motivated when because I had a couple of like quite sizable guests. The episodes really interesting back and forth, really strong conversations, quite big following they've got. And for whatever reason, the recording didn't work. There was a glitch. There's this, that, and the other. And that's happened on a few podcasts that were really interested. And it's quite demoralising when something like that happens, because again, you build up this momentum. You start doing quite a few consistently. You build up a bit of a flow, start getting a following, and then you start having these sort of speed bumps, whatever you want to call it. Again, it's it's quite abrupt. It's a bit harsh. But okay, I had this really good expectation, and this sort of obstacle gets in the way. And again, you need to be able to take that in your stride and think, okay, this is part of the process. As cliche as you like, and we get a little cliche count on this sort of episode as well, because again, there's going to be a lot of sort of quotes in this, that, and the other. Now, when it comes to delivering the podcast in itself, so the nature of what this is as a whole is going to be my interpretation of what I wanted to do, and then the actual execution, and then that happy medium of what it turns out to be. So again, I had this conversation earlier today. It's this big Venn diagram of me being authentic versus me being organised and a bit more structured. And again, if you get a bit too far one side, it can take away the other. Because again, I don't want something very sort of commercial, very sort of rigid. I want something authentic and organic, and again, keeping people in the right light and the whole sort of tone of these things. I mean, for example, now I've got a notepad. I'm not reading a script, but I've got reference points in case I get a bit stuck or get a bit lose track of things. Just like that. So again, when I was talking about dealing with like external factors in this sort of sense, when it comes to delivering my idea the way I want it to be presented, it's keeping the people on who I want to get on. So prime example, it's meant to be quite a diverse platform. So it's not just the sort of the A-list sort of people in the fight world. It's officials, it's people in the amateur scene, it's people who are up and coming, people who are interesting. Because again, my real point with this has always been, you can get pro fighters who are quite sort of monotonous with what they do. They sort of just do it. They don't really think. They're not very cognitive. And that's fine. They get the results. But to have a conversation with, it's like pulling teeth to an extent. Whereas you'll get certain amateurs who have got some really interesting input on certain things. Because again, they're surrounded by these people. They're absorbing it. And then their lessons, they're sort of, the expression from Oscar Wilde, if I've seen further because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. It's a bit of that kind of thing. Because again, you're getting that more filtered down, more streamlined sort of quality of understanding of what's going on. Because again, as the sport evolves, it gets more and more taught that from the start. So you get people learning straight MMA and then so on and so forth, sort of techniques and things like this. And also, as the sort of conversations of mental health and other sort of interests sort of filter in, you'll get a lot more, interesting perspective on things, different sort of terminology being used, different sort of language being used. And having these conversations really opens it up. So before I get into the sort of the ad read for a sponsor, I'm going more detail with the English Hypontist himself. Because again, I had a session with him. And what this isn't part of the ad read, this is a sort of separate thing. So what this is really was an opportunity to really understand the sort of self-deprecation side. So outside of the podcast in itself, when it comes to competition, I've been one of these who always sort of falls short of the mark. It doesn't really show up on the day. And a huge point in the session we had was like NLP, so like neural linguistic programming. So sort of language you say to yourself. And it's a really tricky one. It's very unnatural because again, being English, you have these sort of habits to be self-deprecating because apparently that's polite. And it's a bit of a strange one and almost counterintuitive. But again, to try and be your own hype man essentially. And it's the reason I'm talking about this is an interesting way of trying to keep yourself on track of how you're doing these things. So you're building this project from scratch. you're having these kind of hiccups, you'll get the momentum, and then something sort of gets in the way. You can get always expressions like, I had the James Smith PT book, and one thing he said now that's actually stuck with me is when you get a flat tire, you don't slash the other three. And this is a whole thing. Okay, we built this so far. This hiccup, we can't let it get in the way of everything else. And then give yourself that pat on the back for everything you've done so far, and don't let that hiccup get in the way of everything else. And this is where it's so important to, be around these people who are going to build you up and also be honest with you. Because the last thing you need is sort of the people who blow smoke up your ass to be polite, whatever that means, and be nice. Or you have to be with people who just sort of put you down as a sense to sort of deal with their own insecurities. So this is where it's very important who you have around you. Now, I'll do a quick ad read for our friend, the English Hypontist, who has sponsored the podcast. Good old English Hypontist. For anyone looking to expand the sort of mental side of the fight world, be sure to check out EnglishHypnotist.com. Richard Hart, absolutely sound bloke. And again, he works with a lot of fighters like Tim Wilde, Bellator superstar. And again, it's the level of understanding he's got for the situation you're in. You can speak to him. He speaks to you very calmly, very understanding, and he listens. And the session I had absolutely changed my world. And I've spoken to him again about going to go back to him for follow-up sessions, even before having the conversation about sponsoring the podcast, because I really do believe in it. And regards of hypnotherapy and sort of hypnotizing as a whole, again, it's something I was quite skeptical about initially. But having been through it, being very compliant, I took a lot from it. And as I say, by supporting our sponsors, you support the podcast. So if you can drop them a follow, likes, messages, inquiries, again, anything like that, drop him a message on Instagram. He's the English Hypnotist. Link will be in the description of this. Okay. Now, when it comes to progression in these sort of things, so goal setting and all those sort of topics, they can be very ambiguous. They can be very daunting. They can be a pipe dream, this, that, and the other. And it can be a very intricate balancing act. So when I came to starting the podcast in the first place, regards of a goal, I didn't set one as such. I'm not one for being motivated by numbers, money, this, that, and the other. It was more creating the most organic product and then progressively building step by step by step. Now, when it comes to these sort of goals, again, you get the whole SMART principle of make sure your goals are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and then get a time frame. And it's a huge key detail of that is being specific, knowing what you want and appreciating whatever you put your timing is what you're going to expect to get back out. Because I'll tell you now, as soon as life started moving again, after lockdown, when I was full-time podcasting pretty much, I was outside of working from home, back to training, back to everything else. It's not realistic to expect the same kind of output, the same kind of results from the podcast if I'm also working, I'm also training, and everything else is going on. So it's having these sort of genuine conversations with yourself as to what's going on. It becomes a real tricky one. Because again, you're expecting the general progression as a sort of steady progress. But life isn't steady. Again, you hear the whole thing about progression is not linear. And that's so true because again, you can't guarantee you're going to get the same amount of views per thing. And the conversion I've had on some episodes hasn't been very consistent. And again, it's still understanding it all. Being prepared to take these risks and ask these questions. And this is a thing in itself. So when it comes to learning about what to do, what not to do, and these sort of things, asking questions, speaking to people. Again, I've had quite a few people who've been very, very supportive. So Scott McKinnon from Monstars MMA. He was the one who's really encouraging. Because again, when it comes to starting a podcast, once he's already had one, I already felt a bit almost standing on his toes, which seems like quite a silly concept. Because again, the amount of podcasts there are. But no, he's more than supportive, asking questions. Again, he was very good with helping me get to the next sort of steps with getting a setup in the first place. And it then goes to the other flip side of things, is not taking critique from anyone you wouldn't go to for advice. Because again, you'll get every Tom, Dick and Harry saying, oh, you haven't got the following to do this, or what makes you think you can do a podcast? And these sort of people, those comments will get in your head, those comments will break you down and make you not want to try. And those aren't the comments you need. It's not realistic. Even from your loved ones and everything else, it depends on the place it's coming from and what the specific things are meant. Because if someone says, I can't do a podcast, full stop, that's nothing to me. What does that mean? If they say, because I haven't got X, Y, and Z, I need to know what X, Y, and Z are. If it's equipment? Is it a case I can borrow it, I can buy, whatever it needs to be, sort that out. Is it an audience? Okay, that sort of thing can come, that sort of thing can grow. And also, why not? Like, what have I got to lose with this sort of thing? Because again, the nature of what I'm doing is motivated to be an organic passion project. And the advice I've given to anyone who's asked about starting these podcasts is do it for you. Keep the product as organic as possible, and everything else put to one side, and that can start building progressively. As long as you're proud of what you're producing, that's the most important part of it all. Because the numbers, again, if you tried to put a number on how many people do you feel, how valuable do you think your podcast is? How many people would value? What number would suffice that value? Like what number is enough to say, okay, this has been the perfect way to value my efforts, my inputs, everything else. And again, there's no number, it's arbitrary. So if you try to compare against this saying, oh, I only got X amount of thousands of downloads or this, that and the other, you're going to feel, oh, that's not enough, it should be more. You'll always want it to be more. And then again, it gets quite exhausting. This is why I'm not really one for being like financially motivated. And again, I appreciate people have got their own circumstances, own preferences. And this is another point I want to get onto, is remembering why you started these things. So for example, with this, even the solo series in itself, you know, you get the you get the influencers are like, I know you guys have been asking me about my workout, and thinking, no one's asked you. But this is kind of that, except no one asked me, but I'm not pretending no one asked me. This is something I felt I wanted to do. And regards of the response, if I have made this as organic and as genuine as I wanted to, I can, obviously there's always room for critique, always room to improve, but that's a separate point. I wanted to try to see how I get on. I can play around with stuff, I can try it out, I could fail, but I'm not going to quit. I'll see how I get on. And again, this is kind of the beauty of this sort of situation. And that, again, it's all the same sort of topic about trying to build this kind of confidence in yourself to try. Because trying is the hardest part with these sort of things. Because you get a lot of people saying, oh, I'd love to do that eventually, or this or this, that and the other. Again, there are always sort of excuses lined up as to why they can't do it yet, or this, that and the other. Some be it valid, but most of the time it's a case of, oh, I just haven't allocated the time yet. Because then you can't make time, you've just got to, you can't find time, you can't make time, you've got to just substitute it. And the time, you haven't got any control of the time. You don't have time of what you're managing in that time. So in itself. Now, along with this sort of subject in itself, it comes to supporting those around you. Now, I've started a segment on my other podcast, and I'm going to start one of this as well, called Growing Business Shoutouts. So a few of my friends' businesses, I would like to just to give them a shout out, just give them a bit of a spotlight. So we've got Vigorate, the freshest skin in the fight game. Head over to vigorate.com. Now Vigorate, again, it's they sponsored me in my MMA career so far. The anti-bac shower gels, rehydration sachets, bath salts, absolutely spot on, and really good for the sort of MMA community. Get my friend Mark Bearpark, I always forget which one it is. He always beats me in sparring, so I'll get it wrong on purpose. His business, Clearview Windows, 17 years in the business, covering residential, commercial and industrial window cleaning, based in Milton Keynes, Bedford and Northamptonshire. Be sure to message him on Instagram. And Techie Fightwear, design and supply custom club, affiliate apparel and fightwear. So that takes me nicely to my next point. Fisticuffs, on the same subject of all of this, launching some Valetudo shorts. Now, again, this is another one of these sort of conversations that it's this whole thing between, don't say your philosophy, your beliefs, embody it. I think that's Marcus Aurelius. And this is why I'm having this sort of conversation now, because I am doing what I'm saying to do as such. And again, this isn't me trying to get on my sort of high horse, or look who's found a book and now he thinks he's this, that and the other. No. It's more a case of the lessons I've learned so far, things I've appreciated. I want to share any advice, any help I can give, with the caveat that if I learn new information that then contradicts what I've already gone through, I can then come back and say, well, actually, this is what I should have said. This is what is actually updated. And again, this is sort of thing I'm taking these risks. So yeah, new Valetudo shorts, they'll be available soon. Check out my Instagram, fisticuffs_podcast, to get a look at that. And now, when it comes to social media, this is something I really want to get into, because this is a very hit and miss subject. People seem to touch on some elements of it, but there's a lot more from the other side of it. So social media, if I ask you what is it, people will think, okay, they'll think the platforms, the sort of Facebooks, Instagrams, this, that, and the other. Then they think it's just sort of, it's a egotistical sort of vain thing of, if I get more likes, that means I'm more important, more valuable, I've got followers, everything else. Okay, I mean, some of it's true, but that's another conversation. But this is more based around what you're putting out versus who you're doing it for. And along with the goal setting, again, this is why this is all around the same sort of topic. Doing things for the right reasons for yourself. So when you're doing your social media posts, so the problem I had pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, was as much as I started I always enjoyed my training, but the social media started picking up a bit more, and it would almost feel that the split between what I put up versus what I'm doing, that sort of split wasn't the right side. It seemed to be I'd focus almost more on the social media side of it. I'd still train, but again, it always have that in mind. Okay, I'll try and get the likes, try and do this, that, and the other, try and build up a following, a profile, along with the training anyway, which kind of goes part and parcel with a lot of athletes at the minute. But again, since lockdown, just naturally sort of filtered off, and it's a really toxic habit because you're not doing it for you. And again, if you take X amount of pictures of you on holiday, for example, and a few of them are blurry, you're not going to post the blurry ones because it's not an accurate representation of what you're trying to show. It's the same situation, but again, it's not been presented the same sort of way. And it's really hard to appreciate, okay, if I'm doing not the best reps, this, that, and the other, it's not going to give a clear representation of what I'm capable of. Underselling yourself. Again, this goes down to how valid am I based on the amount of likes I get, this, that, and the other response. And on top of that, we then go on to topics like the other side of this. So when it comes to the fighters, I'm not going to name names, but when it comes to the whole FOMO that, okay, I'm training as hard as I can, putting all the hours in, trying to get ready for my fight. Oh, I'm feeling burnt out, I need to rest. But then you see another fighter doing this, you see another person doing this, you see a big group there, you get that sort of FOMO feeling. And then you can't settle, then you have to take more time off because you're more burnt out. And again, it just keeps on spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. And it gets very sort of the other side of things. If you've got a feeling you're not doing enough, you feel you're not at the same sort of level, you feel you're getting left behind, it really fucking escalates. So again, it's always a bit mindful of that side of things as well. And again, I'm kind of going off on a couple of tangents with this, but the key take-home points from this has got to be about motivational factors, and that this should really come from within, in the sense of doing it for your goals, for your best interest at heart. If you're doing it for your ego, for your admiration, for your approval, that's where you're sort of on a slippery slope, because again, that sort of thing's not sustainable. Like, put it this way. If I do my podcast purely for people's responses and bragging rights, or whatever you want to call it, I don't know, that's not really sustainable. And eventually, X amount of weeks, months down the line, and I stop feeling it, then what? It's nothing. Whereas if I prioritize, okay, steady growth, consistent uploading, this sort of thing, regardless of how I feel about that whilst I'm going through that, I have made tangible progress. And then regardless of how I feel as a whole, again, that could be sort of measured, that could be sort of worked out. And this is where I go into a really interesting point, is being able to be honest with yourself when you're burning out with certain things. So on the same vein of, you see everyone else doing all this, you feel like you should be doing more, it's exhausting, you put all this time, all this effort in. Again, learning how to rest and not to quit are very different things. It's a very, very important thing. And again, you have other podcasts, again, like Monstars, We Are MMA, and all these other pages like growing so quickly. And it's kind of spikes a bit of insecurity. This is what I could have had if I had put more work in. Again, you sort of chip at your own insecurities, this, that, and the other. But again, it's being able to aware, do you know what? The pressure of comparison and the pressure of just trying to keep back unsustainable consistency is just going to exhaust the whole process. And again, by doing that, the conversation become more forced, try to get more substance out of something that would organically feel that, but then it just sort of, I don't know, everything becomes unnatural. So then taking time away from that, tapering down, doing them less often, but still relatively frequently. It's like weekly, maybe once every 2 weeks or so. Excuse me. And again, it's very important to then have that kind of honest conversation with yourself in every sort of thing you do. So again, whether it's frequency of training, podcasting, working, social media, all that kind of stuff. Because again, like a spell of time off social media would do you the world of good. Like again, I'm mainly on there for my ego and my own business page. Other than that, and memes, can't forget the memes. Again, it becomes a bit of a balancing act as a whole. And again, when it comes to these sort of topics in themselves, by all means, send in to fisticuffs_podcast. And any other questions, topics, feel free to fire them away. Be sure to check out my main podcast, my interviews on all social media, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And again, we've also got my Lenjois MMA show with Cast and Lenjois. Got our recent episode up now. We've also got a live stream episode. And again, any feedback, any questions, feel free to fire them away. And take care and stay safe.